several times a week, but I knew how upsetting it was for her to see her now, confined to a wheelchair and unable to speak. It's such a cruel disease, I sighed. I know it's devastating for Nat. Life could be so cruel sometimes, and my heart felt heavy for both of the girls and what each of them was going through. We were so caught up in our conversation that I didn't hear my phone ringing in my bag. It wasn't until Graham had gone to the loo that I checked it and saw 2 missed calls. It was Becky's number, my supervising social worker from the fostering agency that I worked for. "Something urgent?" asked Graham as he came back to the table. "Oh, Becky's trying to get hold of me," I shrugged. "It's probably about the Skills to Foster course I'm helping them run next week, but I better give her a quick call to make sure." "Of course," he nodded. I quickly went outside to the car park and rang her. It was a chilly March day, and I pulled my coat around me to protect me from the cold wind. "Hi, Maggie," she said when she answered. "Thanks for ringing back. I was hoping you might be able to help me with something." I could already tell by the serious tone of her voice that this wasn't about the fostering course. "Social services have just rung," she told me. "They're desperately trying to find a home for 2 little girls who've just come into care. I know you've only got Natalie at the moment, so I thought I'd try you." "What do you know about them?" I asked. As was normally the case, the details were sketchy. The 2 little girls were 4 and 7 and lived in a village around an hour away from me. Sadly, it sounded like a case of neglect. They haven't been in the area for very long, but a neighbour called the NSPCC because she was concerned, Becky told me. The oldest girl doesn't seem to go to school, and the neighbour has seen them wandering around the garden at all hours. She found the eldest walking on the road in the dark the other night. When she took her back, the parents didn't seem to even notice that she'd been missing and proceeded to hit her in front of the neighbour. When social services had gone to visit, they'd faced a hostile reaction. The parents wouldn't let them come in or see the children. The same thing had happened when they tried later the same day. So they'd applied to the courts for an emergency protection order, or EPO, which meant social services could remove the children and take them into foster care if they had concerns. It also meant they could take a police officer with them who could force entry if the parents refused to let them in again. This time, however, they'd relented. When they eventually did get in, apparently they were living in absolute squalor, Becky told me. "Poor little mites," I sighed. "I'd be happy to take them." To be honest, I didn't even need to think about it. Cases where little ones had been neglected still broke my heart, no matter how many times I'd seen it before. "Thanks, Maggie," Becky sighed, sounding relieved. "I really appreciate that." "Oh, and you already know their social worker," she added. "It's a woman called Liz Fleming." "Oh yes, I remember Liz," I smiled. Liz and I had worked together a couple of times in the past. She was the social worker of a girl that I'd fostered years ago called Ruth, whose story I told in The Little Ghost Girl. And, more recently, an 8-year-old boy called Tom, who I wrote about in Daddy's Little Soldier. It was always nice when you had an established relationship with a social worker, and I liked Liz a lot. "I'll wait for her to bring them round then," I told Becky. "As far as I know, they spent last night in hospital being checked over, so she'll be bringing them to you from there," she told me. I went back into the pub to find Graham. "You've got to go, haven't you?" he said, as soon as I walked over to the table. "I'm really sorry," I sighed. "A couple of children are on their way over to me, and I need to make sure that everything's ready for them." "Don't worry," he smiled. I felt bad ending our lovely lunch so abruptly, but Graham understood what fostering was like. "Let's do this again soon," he told me, as I bent down to give him a goodbye kiss. "I'd like that," I nodded. Although with 2 young children on their way to me, I had no idea when that would be. As I drove the 20-minute journey home, I was filled with the rush of adrenaline I always got when a new placement was arriving. After years of fostering, I knew the routine by now, but I couldn't help but go through a mental checklist in my head. Natalie had 1 bedroom, and the other spare room I used for foster children had a bunk bed and a single bed in it, so there was plenty of room for the girls. Thankfully, there was already clean bedding on all of the beds. Recently, I'd had older children staying with me, so I'd made it look more grown up. But with 2 younger girls on the way,